We last met in an hour of shock and suffering. In 4 short months, our nation has comforted the victims, begun to rebuild New York and the Pentagon, rallied a great coalition, captured, arrested, and rid the world of thousands of terrorists, destroyed Afghanistan's terrorist training camps, saved the people from starvation, and freed a country from brutal oppression.
Looking at the country a quarter century ago, I feel a sense of anemoia. It was a time when America was winning an overseas war, when democracy had replaced autocracy in Afghanistan, when the world admired and respected this great land, and when the people were united in their resolve to make the world a better place. Sure, nobody knew where bin Laden was, and the president was a dumbass, but I would have been quite optimistic about the nation's future in the new millennium.
10 minutes later.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Of course, I wasn't alive in 2002, no matter which side of the abortion debate you're on. Being able to look back from a modern perspective, I can say that the State of the Union address I'm using as B-roll was the high watermark of the war on terror. The seeds for defeat were planted within 24 hours of 9/11, but really began to sprout here.
And there is no doubt in my mind, not one doubt in my mind, that we will fail.
For those of you who aren't familiar with my channel, this is the second part of a broader discussion about the first 2 years of the war on terror. I might stitch everything together into one larger video in the future, but for now, I'm picking up where I left off after the fall of the Taliban and bin Laden's escape from Tora Bora. This video is about how errors made by the United States afterwards squandered operational victory and led to strategic defeat. The first of several post-2001 errors made by the United States was continuing the policy of no negotiation with the Taliban. In January 2002, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, the Taliban's foreign minister who had turned against the Taliban, attempted to reach out to Karzai in the United States with a plan to create a pro-American Taliban group. Vice President Dick Cheney, viewing all Taliban as evil, shut down the idea, and Mutawakil was locked up in the infamous Bagram prison. In June, before that month's Loya Jirga, or Grand Assembly, that established a transitional government in Afghanistan, Agha sent Karzai a letter asking for the Taliban to participate in the new government as a political party in exchange for the prior offer to lay down their arms. Once again, Karzai was open to the idea, the Bush administration was not. After the transitional administration was formed, hardliners in the Taliban began to sabotage any attempts at making peace, and Mullah Omar turned against the prospect as well. After 2003, the Taliban decided to retake Afghanistan by force, and the United States finally put its foot down, banning negotiations with Taliban leaders and ordering them to be captured or killed. There were no attempts by the United States to talk with the Taliban until Barack Obama's presidency. But while Bush was president, the policy was that because the Taliban had lost, there was no need for negotiation. Their continued alliance with Al-Qaeda certainly didn't help matters, and the Taliban never made any offers to abandon it. But that issue could have been sorted out with words instead of weapons. As long as Bush was president, there would be no peace in Afghanistan, so a return to war was unavoidable. Having given the Taliban a reason to fight back, the United States then made a second error, the failure to build up an Afghan army that could protect the country from a Taliban resurgence. After the 2001 victory, Bush decided that Afghanistan needed a national army and could not rely on tribal militias, which did not always work together. Rumsfeld was supportive of the idea, reasoning that in Afghanistan it could defend itself would allow the United States to leave, but kept penny pinching. He went as far as saying the United States should not spend any money on building an Afghan army, let the militia function as the army, and not supply any new equipment. This was a man who came from a country that had rejected the idea of using militia for national defense 2 centuries ago. Rumsfeld was eventually convinced that building a national army was necessary, but an official American commitment did not begin until December 2002, a full year after Kandahar and Tora Bora. The next question was how large the army should be. Afghanistan's Minister of Finance, Ashraf Ghani, wanted a 70,000 strong army. Zalmay Khalilzad, the American ambassador to Afghanistan, wanted 120,000. Rumsfeld put a cap at 50,000, then continued to pinch pennies. He would occasionally complain about how slow the process was, but did nothing to devote the resources necessary to speed things up. By 2006, the Afghan army was just 26,000 strong. This neglect for the army extended to the quality quality of the soldiers as well. Each 1,000-strong battalion only received 10 weeks of training, bumped up to 14 in 2005, but still insufficient to produce capable infantry. As limited resources slowed the growth of the army, battalions started to lose strength because new recruits weren't arriving fast enough to replace deserters or retirees. Training had to be further curtailed for the sake of getting replacements into their units. The officer corps fared little better because Rumsfeld refused to let American officers direct selection until 2004. Another part of the problem was that the American trainers being sent to Afghanistan were not of high enough quality. Initially, Army Special Forces teams who had fought alongside the Northern Alliance trained the 1st Afghan units, and the Green Berets were the most effective force in the military for such a task. But in 2003, they were replaced with regular infantry from the 10th Mountain Division. Then in 2004, the 10th Mountain was replaced with the National Guard, which had little experience in training foreign armies. This outright neglect for Afghanistan's army extended into Kabul as well. Karzai was a man who took the lives of his soldiers for granted and held a disdain for war. He once said, quote, "I am not worried about army and police casualties. They are recruited for that." Karzai's disdain from the army and, more importantly, the lack of commitment by the Bush administration meant that the United States, which has stood up more capable militaries in less time in Korea and elsewhere, botched the process for 5 years. The Taliban made use of that time much better, as demonstrated by the success of their 2006 offensive. It wasn't just the offensive saw major Taliban gains in southern and eastern Afghanistan. Its success transformed how the nation's populace viewed the movement. Before the offensive, 88% of Afghanistan's population viewed the United States favorably, but that number dropped to 52% by 2010 and never bounced back. This happened because the Taliban's image had changed from defeated oppressors to victorious liberators, fighting to free Afghanistan from foreign occupation. In a country with a centuries-old tradition of resistance, this was a powerful idea that effectively rendered American victory impossible. But even with the mistakes made by the United States in rejecting negotiations and neglecting defense, there's still a large missing piece. The American military still should have been able to defeat the Taliban offensive. A defeat could have constrained the movement's territorial extent and popular appeal, thus drawing fewer Afghans to the Taliban. An insurgency might still have existed, but it would have been marginal and incapable of posing a threat to Afghanistan's government. The United States possesses the most powerful military on Earth. Surely it could.
Hey, Saddam, your tyranny is done. The coalition of the willing will now enforce 1441. Bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum. Bum, ba, bum, bum, Saddam.
I'm sure you're familiar with the part about the WMDs, but even if Saddam had them, there's still no way he would have ever used them or given them to Al-Qaeda. Using them would of course have meant the obliteration of his government, and Saddam's secular regime was despised by pan-Islamists like bin Laden. But even that misses the point, because the Iraq War was never as much about WMDs or 9/11 as much as it was about America. Remember that PNAC letter? After the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States was the sole superpower, and the neoconservative movement was determined to use that new imbalance in global power to America's advantage. Multilateralism and respect for international institutions were to be swept aside in favor of a new world order where the United States could do whatever it wanted and the rest of the world would shut up and comply. Iraq was chosen not because it was a threat, but because it couldn't fight back. At least not as much as Iran or North Korea. Success in Iraq, it was hoped, would make everyone forget about Vietnam, eliminate ideas like deterrence and containment in favor of unilateral preemptive war, and show America's allies and enemies alike that when they were told to jump, they should ask how high. A nearly ubiquitous war aim was the spread of Middle Eastern democracy, adding Iraq to the ranks of Afghanistan and Israel. The most extreme variations of this aim proposed by Wolfowitz, David Frum, and Bill Kristol envisioned a kind of reverse domino effect, in which the Iranian people, surrounded by democracy in Iraq and Afghanistan, would overthrow the Ayatollah and establish democracy in Iran, which would then pressure Saudi Arabia and other Arab states to liberalize as well, and soon enough the Middle East would be full of democracies that wouldn't tolerate terrorism.
A liberated Iraq could show the power of freedom to transform the Middle East. We believe the Iraqi people are deserving and capable of human liberty. And when the dictator has departed, they can set an example to all the Middle East of a vital and peaceful and self-governing nation.
You can probably point out how absurd this idea is, and there were individuals within the administration who didn't believe in using the military to remake the Middle East in America's image. One of them was Rumsfeld. Rummy didn't care what happened in Iraq after Saddam was gone, and because he had complete authority over the invasion, there was no plan for what to do after the Iraqi dictatorship was overthrown. This was his response to the widespread looting in Baghdad that he refused to order the military to stop.
Stuff happens. But in terms of what's going on in that country, it is a fundamental misunderstanding to see those images over and over and over again of some boy walking out with a vase and saying, oh my goodness, you didn't have a plan. That's nonsense. They know what they're doing, and they're doing a terrific job. And it's untidy, and freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things.
Now, considering even the idealists like Wolfowitz didn't see any need to plan for an occupation of Iraq, assuming the Iraqi people would just set up a democratic government on their own, you can't fault Rumsfeld alone for not having a plan, even if he was the guy in charge. But the lack of post-war planning was a symptom of a much bigger issue with Rumsfeld that shows why he was completely unqualified to lead the American military into the new millennium. Throughout his second tenure as defense secretary, Rumsfeld displayed an arrogant disregard for the professional military, particularly the army. He saw overthrowing Saddam as an opportunity to prove his theory that wars could be won with little expenses and small commitments. Let's ignore the fact that Iraq was an odd place to try, since the Iraqi military was so weak that almost any war plan would have worked, and instead keep talking about the ramifications his line of thinking had on planning for the invasion. Believing that he could substitute troops for technology and encouraged by success in Afghanistan, Rumsfeld insisted on an invasion force large enough to topple Saddam and nothing more. Army Chief of Staff Erich Shinseki, who had prior experience commanding American peacekeeping forces in Bosnia, had a dispute with Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz regarding how many troops should be sent into Iraq.
Could you give us some ideas to the magnitude of the Army's force requirement for an occupation of Iraq following a successful completion of the war?
In specific numbers, I would have to rely on combatant commanders' exact requirements, but I think...
How about a range?
I would say that what's been mobilized to this point, something on the order of several 100,000 soldiers are probably a figure that would be required. We're talking about post-hostilities, control over a piece of geography that's fairly significant with the kinds of ethnic tensions that could lead to other problems, and so it takes a significant ground force presence to maintain a safe and secure environment.
But remember, Rumsfeld didn't want troops to stabilize Iraq, and Wolfowitz didn't think it was necessary.
Some of the higher-end predictions that we have been hearing recently, such as the notion that it will take several 100,000 U.S. troops to provide stability in post-Saddam Iraq, are wildly off the mark. First, it's hard to conceive that it would take more forces to provide stability in post-Saddam Iraq than it would take to conduct the war itself and to secure the surrender of Saddam's security forces and his army. Hard to imagine. There's been none of the record in Iraq of ethnic militias fighting one another that produced so much bloodshed and permanent scars in Bosnia, along with a continuing requirement for large peacekeeping forces to separate those militias. I am reasonably certain that they will greet us as liberators.
Did you also notice that Wolfowitz, one of the most vocal proponents for regime change in Iraq, had no fucking clue what we were getting into? It wasn't just that the attacking force was small, it was 3 times smaller than the attacking force employed in 1991 for the limited aim of restoring Kuwait's sovereignty. As a result of this underwhelming force, the United States was unable to secure weapons and ammunition dumps before they fell into the wrong hands, prevent a widespread looting in Baghdad, not that Rumsfeld cared, or lock down Iraq's borders. Under these circumstances, combined with the presence of Ba'athist hardliners loyal to Saddam, some degree of armed resistance was unavoidable, but the scale of the insurgency could still have been more limited had it not been for 2 key errors.
Without fanfare, with scarcely a shot fired, American armor rolled into the center of Baghdad today and began liberating the city as Iraqis celebrated in the streets.
After Saddam fled from Baghdad, the United States established the Coalition Provisional Authority to administer Iraq until a new government could be established. Initially headed by Lieutenant General J. Garner, who had served in the Persian Gulf War and worked closely with military planners to create plans for rebuilding Iraq, he was replaced after a month by Paul Bremer, a man with no prior experience with Iraq or military occupations. Against the advice of Garner and the military planners, Bremer issued 2 orders in May that plunged Iraq into anarchy and eliminated whatever chance the United States had left to win the war on terror. The first order banned all senior Ba'ath Party members from serving in government and decapitated the top 3 layers of officials from all government ministries, regardless of if they were senior Ba'ath Party members. While Saddam loyalists would of course have to be removed, Bremer's implementation of de-Ba'athification went far beyond that. He ended up firing tens of thousands of Iraqi civilians who were forced to join the party in order to keep their jobs, including the leadership and top technical capacity for universities, hospitals, and communications, as well as the technicians operating Iraq's electricity electricity, water, and transportation infrastructure. Between 85 and 100,000 people, including 40,000 school teachers, were in effect fired for the crime of being employed. The Second Order completely disbanded Iraq's armed forces. This decision was much more baffling, as Bush had decided in March that maintaining Iraq's army was essential to post-war stability. Even further back, from June 2002 onwards, American aircraft were dropping leaflets over the country, promising soldiers that if they did not fight for Saddam, they would be allowed to keep their jobs in the new Iraqi army. By the time Bremer made his decision, 137,000 applicants are registered to come back, and intelligence estimates indicated that most of the army could be recalled and put back to work within 2 weeks. Instead, hundreds of thousands of armed men, once part of Iraq's most respected institution, were left with no jobs and a burning hatred for the country which had seemingly double-crossed them. These two errors turned most of Iraq's population against the Americans, whose public image of the country shifted from liberators to oppressors. General Franks, who, like Wolfowitz, had no plans for what to do after the invasion, instead assuming the Iraqis would just accept American occupation, claimed in his autobiography that, quote, "There's never been a combat operation as successful as Iraqi freedom." The post-invasion anarchy that gripped Iraq also provided an opening for al-Qaeda to bounce back. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, an ally of bin Laden who had escaped from Afghanistan in 2001, established an al-Qaeda affiliate in Iraq, creatively known as al-Qaeda in Iraq. Acting in opposition to bin Laden, who wanted to create a unified anti-American front between Sunni and Shia Muslims, Zarqawi inflamed sectarian divisions in Iraq, portraying himself as the protector of the Sunni minority against the Shia majority. He finally succeeded in plunging Iraq into civil war in February 2006 after the bombing of the Al-Askari Shrine, one of the most important Shia shrines in the world. When the Taliban offensive in Afghanistan began 2 months later, emboldened to retake the country by force after the Iraq War dissipated America's military power, the resources needed to stop them were unavailable due to Bush's choice to prioritize Iraq over Afghanistan. 8 years later, the affiliate in Iraq would formally split from al-Qaeda, declare a new caliphate under Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and rename itself the Islamic State, more widely known in the West as ISIS. Combined with the setbacks suffered in Afghanistan as a result of the Iraq War, a case can be made that no matter how brutal Saddam was, he should have been left alone.
Taliban forces entered the heart of the Afghan capital, Kabul, today, the culmination of a rapid advance and retaking of control almost exactly 2 decades after they were ousted from power.
I don't think you can blame a single policy or politician for losing the war on terror. Iraq comes close, and there were definitely standouts, but the Bush administration was filled to the brim with incompetence, assholes, warmongers, and a Sith Lord who all contributed to making Afghanistan and Iraq the shit shows they became. If I had to boil everything down to 2 reasons, it would have to be vengeance and hubris. The desire for vengeance is easy to understand. Part of what made 9/11 such a traumatic event was that the United States is rarely ever under attack. Many Americans are used to peace at home, even if there is violence abroad.
Americans have known wars, but for the past 136 years, they have been wars on foreign soil, except for one Sunday in 1941. Americans have known the casualties of war, but not at the center of a great city on a peaceful morning. Americans have known surprise attacks, but never before on thousands of civilians. All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world.
The policy of no negotiations with the Taliban was born out of a desire for vengeance, since the Taliban were seen as inseparable from al-Qaeda, and tying Saddam to 9/11, no matter how flimsy the evidence, was a necessary precondition for the Iraq War, as it tied Iraq to the pre-existing desire for vengeance against bin Laden. The refusal to accept a formal surrender from the Taliban and the decision to invade Iraq were born not from just vengeance, but also hubris. The development of hubris has its birth in the 2001 campaign that overthrew the Taliban. The alleged graveyard of empires having fallen in just 2 months gave the United States a false sense of security in Afghanistan and an increased confidence in the military. For as much as nation building has become a dirty word in modern politics, the war on terror is really an example of what happens when you try half-assing the process. In the 2000 election, Bush drew a distinction between regime change and nation building.
Somalia started off as a humanitarian mission and then changed into a nation building mission, and that's where the mission went wrong. The mission was changed. And as a result, our nation paid a price. And so I don't think our troops ought to be used for what's called nation building. I think our troops ought to be used to fight and win war. I think our troops ought to be used to help overthrow a dictator that's when it's in our best interests. But in this case, it was a nation-building exercise. And same with Haiti. I wouldn't have supported either.
He claimed he changed his mind after 9/11, but the administration's actions never reflected this. In the planning for Iraq, more focus was placed on overthrowing Saddam than stabilizing Iraq once Saddam was gone. Even in Afghanistan, while the Iraq War certainly didn't help, the United States was never fully committed to stabilizing Afghan democracy. All of this meant that by the summer of 2003, the United States had lost the war on terror. The Bush administration's obsession with Saddam, disdain for nation building, and belief in American omnipotence has made the 21st century a painful one for this country. I'm the Counterfactor, and thanks for watching.
Big bang bang roll, got cheat codes. Certified in the hood, boy, they all know. Don't be asking y'all that you gotta know to know. Gotta